Thank you very much for coming to our webinar today. Today we'll be talking about how to select U.S. universities for your application. Today we have Cedric, who is a graduate of Shelton College, graduated in 2017. He's currently attending Harvard University, and he'll be sharing his experience with selecting universities. Before I get into that, we have a lot of new parents in the webinar today, so I thought I might take this chance to briefly introduce MAST Education. So MAST Education was founded by myself, my mother, who used to be a chemistry teacher at Hong Kong International School, and my two partners, Michael and Cord. We created this platform to help students find very relevant tutors. So what does relevant tutors mean? A relevant tutor is someone who has taken the same subject, they show that they have recent experience, went through the same high school, and maybe attending the same university that the student wants to apply to. So for example, let's say there's a student who's currently attending Chinese International School, who's taking IB higher level physics. Through our platform, you'll be able to find a tutor who has taken that same course. It seems like I cannot be heard. Is anyone else having this problem? Michael and Cord, can you please look into this right now? Anyways, in the interest of time, I will continue along. Okay, seems like I can be heard by certain participants. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll continue, and if there's anything, we will record this screencast, so if there's anything that parents have missed, they can rewatch it later on. So again, what we try to do is match students to tutors who are who have high relevance to the student. What we find is that with these types of matches, the student is able to gain knowledge transfer from the tutor and also get a sense of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation being that they're motivated internally rather than externally. And ideally, through having a tutor that has been through the same system, there's a form of stress reduction both on the student and parent side. I think for a lot of the IB tutors and a lot of the AP tutors, they have been through the experience, so they understand what students and parents are worried about. And that's where our tutors can help. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over Cedric Lee. Cedric, please enlighten parents. And if there's any questions along the way, please do type in the chat, and we can drop a line. I'll interject and ask the question to Cedric. But Cedric, please go ahead.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. I'm Cedric Lee. I'll be running the webinar today, and I'm very happy to have you all. Again, as Alex said, if you have any questions, please feel free to type in the chat box, and Alex will refer your questions to me, and I can clear up any questions you might have throughout the way. So a little about me first. I'm currently studying at Harvard, concentrating in statistics and studying a secondary in economics. I graduated in Shelton College in 2017, and I did the IB diploma there. On the screen, you'll see some of my scores. I won't go through them very specifically, but my main subjects in high school were mathematics, economics, and geography. I also took the bilingual diploma for those of you who are familiar with the IB. So I studied first language Chinese and English. In high school, I did a variety of activities, but my main activities were MUN and debating. I was the captain for both of them. And as well as that, I also founded my own charitable organization that worked with primary schools in the Guangdong region. I'll be talking more about those activities later in the extracurricular section and the essay section. As well as that, I also applied to 2 universities in my senior year in college, Harvard and UC Berkeley. Obviously, I got into Harvard and I also got into Berkeley, so I chose to go to Harvard instead. And as I applied to Harvard early, I didn't have to apply to any more schools because the process was done for me in December. Finally, after getting into university, I applied to the Hong Kong Government Scholarship for Excellence scheme, and that provides 250,000 Hong Kong dollars in scholarship awards per year, which you can use to pay for your tuition. So that's a brief introduction about myself. So let's just jump straight into it. This is the basics about American universities. So just having a look at the timeline, so you have an idea of dates that might be coming up soon if you or your child is thinking about applying this year. So early action and early application deadlines are coming up soon, just over 2 weeks from now, at the end of December. And if you are going to apply early, you're going to hear back around mid-December. If you're going to apply regular as well, then your deadlines will be at the end of December, for which you'll hear back at the end of April, typically. So, we talked about early and regular just now. So the question for you right now might be, when should I apply? Or when should my child apply? And the question really depends on the applicant themselves. So I'll go through and talk about each of the application times and the relative advantage and disadvantage. For applying early decision and restrictive early action, you typically can only apply to one school. The difference between early decision and restrictive early action is that early decision is a binding contract. So typically, before you apply, you say, if I get in, then I will definitely go to your school. And if you don't, and if you break that contract, there are typically some repercussions for your school. I know for Xiaoting College a long time ago, someone got into UPenn early decision, and he decided not to go because he also got accepted into Cambridge. And for 10 years after that, no one who applied to UPenn from Xiaoting College got in. So there are some consequences to not accepting your acceptance if you do get accepted for early decision. But as for restrictive early action, if you do get in, you don't have to go. So that's what happened for me at Harvard. But of course, it was Harvard, so I decided to accept my acceptance. There's also this. Some of you might have heard that applying early has a higher acceptance rate, but you need to be careful because this doesn't necessarily mean that applying early is easier. Because most people who do apply early are the people who've done a lot of research and are really passionate about certain schools or certain subjects. So because they're so passionate and they're so sure that they want to go to these schools, they're better matches for these schools. And these schools can actually see this passion through their application. And that is why the acceptance rates are higher, because the people who are applying are actually, perfect fits already. So just because the acceptance rate is higher, it doesn't mean it's necessarily easier. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If you're applying normally and you don't want to apply early, then you're going to be in the regular decision bracket. So again, you're going to be applying through the Common App, more on that later. And there's no limit on the number of schools. The obvious advantage of this is that there's more time to prepare than for early decision, because you'll be applying by the end of December. The main exception to this that will concern most of you, I think, is the UC system, which is the University of California. They have a separate application portal, so their deadlines are slightly different. Their deadline's around late November normally, and through this portal, you can apply to all the University of California schools at the same time. So what are the components of an application? For most of the universities you or your child will be applying to, it will be the Common App. So the Common App is this website basically, and you can pick schools that you want to apply to on the website very easily. So I believe that when you log in, you can just fill in, okay, these are the schools I want to apply to, and it'll bring you to separate pages for each. On the Common App, there will be a variety of things that you need to fill out. So the most basic things are like your educational background, your parents' information, your personal beliefs and affiliations, your previous test scores. So it's all a very simple process. If you can see in the little diagram below, it's just a name field, and there'll be like a little box for you to fill in. So this should take you about an hour. So into the main components of the application. So the basic information in the Common App takes about an hour. The bulk of your time will be spent thinking about some other things. So firstly, let's look at how universities look at applications. So what happens when you actually send an application into a university? Firstly, they'll be looking at your grades. So if your grades, let's say this is a pile of applications, if your grades don't reach the minimum requirement or the grade range of the school, they'll probably just chuck it straight out. And so probably probably half of the applications will go through. And the reason why they do this is because they want to make sure that you can actually succeed academically. You might be a very great person, but if your scores won't make it in that sort of environment, then they probably won't let you through. Secondly, it's extracurriculars and references. So out of this remaining pile, they'll see, okay, how many of these people were really engaged in school and were able to balance their school life and their extracurricular life really well, right? Because American schools want people with strong personalities. If they see that you don't have any extracurricular activities and all you did was stay in your room and study all day, that probably won't be very effective for them and very attractive for them. So they'll probably throw, some more out. And then from the original, 100%, there'll probably be 20 or 30% left. And this is the final stage and one of the most important stages, where they'll start looking at your college essays and your references. So in your college essays, you want to learn a few things. I'll talk more specifically about this later. But it's about who is this person, what is this person, and what are the values that matter to this person. So we'll walk through each step of the way in this process to see how you can maximize your chances of getting past each stage. So firstly, grades. One of the more important things to look at is your standardized test scores. I'm pretty sure all of you have heard of the SATs or the ACTs. So which one should you choose, right? I think the rule of thumb here is that if you have stronger vocabulary, then you should take the SAT. If you're better with numbers or data, you should take the ACT. I personally chose the SAT, even though I'm personally more comfortable with numbers and data, largely because I wasn't as prepared and didn't do much research. So don't copy from me if you can. But personally, I really enjoyed studying for the SAT because when I did do the SAT, it was very vocabulary focused. So I had to remember a lot of words that I'd never seen before, never used before. And I think that really helped in expanding my vocabulary. And that sort of helped me in other places outside of the SAT. So I feel like I can be more expressive nowadays when I write. Also, I think in most international schools, grammar isn't taught as formally as in other places. So through the process of learning the SAT, I had a more rigorous sort of learning of grammar that I never really had in primary school. Which is why I thought the SAT was pretty good, even though vocabulary and writing may not be the strongest part of my application. Yeah, but typically most schools have no preference as to which one you choose. Both SAT and ACT are acceptable. I think the rule of thumb for these is that they should be finished by the end of junior year, just because you don't want to worry about having to prepare for it in your senior year when you're busy writing applications and completing your other schoolwork. Also, one last thing is that SATs and ACTs can be taken more than once. Typically, universities don't really care if you're taking it 2 or 3 times because they tend to be pretty understanding that maybe one day you just didn't perform as well, and the second time you did better. But don't overuse this rule because you don't want to be taking the SAT 7 times. It probably won't be good on your application if you do so. So after you do your SATs, you have to do your SAT2s typically. So your SAT2s are subject tests in academic areas that you're comfortable with. So these actually, there are 20 subjects in 5 areas of study that you can pick from. And these should be subjects that you're actually taking currently in high school, because they want to see how effective or how accurate your high school curriculum is. Because if you're someone applying from, say, rural China, they might not know what an A means in that school, which is why they use a standardized test to see if your A in China actually translates to full marks in an SAT subject test. So how many should you typically take? Schools typically require 2, but some schools have exceptions. So you should check before you apply. I personally took mathematics 2 and biology because these were the 2 subjects that I were taking in high school. And these are also the only 2 subjects that were offered in the SAT subject tests. Also, if you have more than one subject that you're taking in high school that is offered in the SAT subject tests, you should pick one that's more relevant to your major. So if you're thinking about taking physics, you should probably think about doing the physics SAT 2 subject test. So how do you prepare? This is a question I get a lot. Firstly, there are many online modules that walk through test taking and the test. So I think the first one you should look at is the one on the College Board website. The College Board is the organization that runs the SAT. I know some of my friends who used that and they said it was pretty effective. I personally used these large SAT prep books that you can get at bookstores. There's a picture on the side as an example. So I think these are pretty good because for the normal SAT, they walk through question types. They walk through, like, they basically teach you the grammar and they teach you vocabulary. For the SAT 2, they teach you the entire curriculum that you need to know on the SAT 2s. So that's something that you should look at because it's important that you know what will turn up in the exam and that it corresponds to, you know, your existing knowledge. Otherwise, you might have to learn some extra things. For me personally, I just trained for a month before each exam with these books, and I think that was pretty effective. But if these two aren't enough, you can also think about SAT boot camps that are run by many tutoring agencies. I know one of my friends actually went to one during the winter holiday one year, and his score improved by 200 points afterwards. So I don't know if it'll be effective every single time, but for him, like, it really worked. What they basically make you do is like just do tests every single day for like 8 hours. So if that's, you know, something you might be interested in, that's something you could always look into. After your standardized tests, there are always your school grades. And, you know, people often think that your SATs, your ACTs are more important, but in reality, school grades matter just as much. In fact, they matter probably, you know, even more because they want to know that you've been a consistent overachiever or a consistent high achiever throughout your entire high school career. So really, grades matter from the start of freshman year, which is 9th grade. And yeah, because again, they want to know that you have that, you know, maturity to complete your schoolwork and balance your schoolwork and extracurricular life. Most schools, yeah. Also, if you're applying to school with a certain major, it's important that you take classes in that major to show your passion. So let's say you want to study physics. It's best if you've taken some AP physics classes or you're taking higher level physics in the IB. So this shows to the school that not only are you passionate about these subjects, but you've actually had experience taking these subjects and have succeeded doing so. Universities want you to be able to graduate. So if they know that you can probably succeed, it's highly likely that they'll let you. So what is a good score? This is a very tricky question, and I don't think there's a very hard and fast answer to this. A good score really depends on what sort of academic institution you're applying to. A good score, if you're trying to apply to UCLA, might be different from what you might expect from a person applying to U Chicago. And a good score really depends also on your own academic ability. I think a good sort of principle to go with is that a good score is an accurate reflection of who you are. Because if it isn't, then it's highly unlikely that you and the university can decide whether or not you are a good fit for each other. Because not everyone is suitable for every single school. Some students are more suitable for some institutions and some others. And your score is a good way to decide which institutions you're better suited for. So don't stress it if you're not getting 800 on your SAT 2s or your 1600 for your SAT, because as long as you try your best and that is the most accurate representation of your ability, that's a good score for you. But just as a reference for some parents who might be curious, for most Ivy League schools and Tier 1 universities like MIT and Stanford, the score is about 1500 plus. And for most UCs, it should be 1400 plus for your SAT. I haven't taken the ACT before, so I'm not sure I could give you a good reference. Okay, so after your grades, universities tend to want to look at extracurricular activities and your references. So let's just recap on like why universities want you to do extracurriculars as well as your academics. It's because they like to know that their students are engaged. They want students who are passionate about certain causes that they believe in, and they want students who will engage in community and make a difference when they graduate. So what qualities or what activities are they looking for? Typically, they aren't looking for anything specific. There are people around me. My roommate next door actually did chemistry Olympiad throughout high school. I did a lot of debating. I know friends who are athletes, who are mainly athletes during high school. Kids who are interested in astronomy. So like it's a whole variety of interests there are a whole variety of interests that universities are looking for. But I think generally what they're looking for is some sort of leadership. I'm sure you've all heard of that before, but what does leadership really mean? And I think like that deserves clarifying here, because people tend to think of leadership as, being president of the student union or president of the debate team. And like, although those are very good things to be, those are very good positions, if you are in those positions and you're interested in those positions, those aren't the only ones that you should be going for, right? Leadership just means, I think, for US universities, that you have a passion and you're willing to spread that passion and show others what you're interested in, right? So for example, if you're interested in fine art or modern art, and you feel like your friends in your high school should have a better understanding of this as well. Leadership could mean, okay, I'm going to start a club for kids in my school who might be interested in art, so I can share my love for art to them. Or it could be, okay, I'm going to contact some local primary schools, and I'm going to see if I can come in maybe Monday after school to talk about my love of art and teach little kids about art, because that's what I'm really passionate about. So again, leadership doesn't have to mean that you have a title of president. Leadership means you have an idea of what the world should be, and you're going to show people, why this deserves to be the way the world should be, or you're willing to show people why you're so passionate about it. Personally, for me, I did debating and MUN in high school. When I started MUN, when I was a sophomore in high school, there was not much infrastructure or support for kids starting out in MUN. I remember at my first conference, we basically went and the student leaders were like, okay, just do your thing, try have fun. And so like when I got into the conference, I basically had no idea what was going on. I didn't know any of the rules. I didn't know how to write a speech. I didn't know how to write any of the documents that you're supposed to write for a Model United Nations conference. And so like, even though I sort of like had to learn along the way and finally got it, I felt like this wasn't a process that, kids after me should have to go through. So when I became captain of the Model United Nations team, I decided to implement a whole series of changes in the infrastructure of MUN at our school. Firstly, I created a mentoring system. So I paired up older and younger students. I buddied them up basically, so younger students could have like a point of reference to talk to. So like, let's say they're having trouble writing speeches, they talk to an older student, the older student and the younger student communicate, and the younger student feels like there's a safety net for them when they go into their first conference. I also implemented more trainings. So there would be mock conferences before the actual conference, so students could get used to, the procedure of an MUN conference. I also had like other sessions where, kids could study together and like research together, so they were more prepared for the final conference. So again, like this isn't very like radical changes. I wasn't like leading social change in the society and like, alleviating poverty on a mass scale. But, I had an idea of what I think this organization should have been. And I actually went out and I initiated these changes. And I think people were generally better off as a result of it. And I think this is generally what universities are looking for when they're talking about leadership. When you have an idea about the world that you're willing to actually go out and actualize. So that's something for you to think about as you, think about your extracurricular activities where you're writing about your extracurriculars. So here are a few more frequently asked questions about extracurriculars. Firstly, it's should I do as many activities as possible? The answer for this is no. This is a common mistake. Universities are looking for you to be really involved in the sense that you're very passionate about certain causes, right? If you're doing 20 clubs at a time, there's no way you're really doing anything substantial in any of them, right? There are many kids I know or I knew in high school who just padded their resumes with like 10 different clubs. But for each of them, they could only write very little because, they were just there for the meetings and then they were gone. They were off to your next meeting without doing anything or contributing anything. So remember, depth matters more than breadth. Universities are not simply looking for well-rounded students, as you'll see in the diagram on the screen. They're looking for students with a spike, something that makes them stand out, something that makes them interesting. That's why there are lots of students here at Harvard who, might not necessarily be very strong on mathematics or STEM, but they're very passionate about theater, for example. And they got it because that's what made them interesting. They were very passionate about theater. They were willing to lead and they were willing to share their love for theater with the people around them. And that's what made them interesting. That's what made them attractive as candidates to universities like Harvard. Secondly, are there specific activities that are better? As I alluded to previously, not really. The best activities are the ones that are most suitable for you. If you're really passionate about rock climbing, then that is the best activity for you. Find a way in which you can flourish in the activities you are and make the most out of these activities. And try to think of ways that you can go the extra mile in these clubs and make a difference. Instead of thinking, oh, is this the right activity for me? The right activity for me is the one that you're passionate about and the one you're willing to put a lot of time to make better. So next, these are references. References are very important. I cannot stress how important they are because they give the admissions officer a second opinion on who you are, right? It's very good that you can say, oh, I'm really outgoing, everyone loves me, I'm very active in class. It's very different for you to say that than for a teacher who's been working with you for 2 years to say that, right? So the teachers can identify your strengths and also your weaknesses. What should a university be concerned about? Or what do you bring that's extra? Or what did the teacher see that's very unique about you that you might not have seen about yourself, right? So these are very important, and having a good reference can help your application along. My reference was written by a former vice principal of my school. She had taught me since 8th grade, and she was also in charge of MUN. So I worked with her a lot, and she watched me grow throughout the years. So because she had that perspective, I think she was able to write a very good reference for Harvard and for Berkeley because she was able to give an actual sort of description about who I was. What were my strengths and what were my weaknesses, right? How have I grown throughout the years from a 12-year-old who she taught for the first time in philosophy to, the 17-year-old that's now trying to get into this elite institution, right? Having that person tell an admissions officer who you are is a very, very important part of your application. So cultivate your relationships, right? Be engaged in class. Approach teachers after class. Work with more teachers in extracurriculars, right? These will all help your application. Because if there's someone else in your school who is willing to vouch for you and who actually knows about you, they're more likely to write a better reference for you, and that's going to help your application. I know some of my friends who weren't as involved or who didn't have as close relationships as I did with my reference writer. And so these reference writers were just like generic reference writers who were matched with random students in their school. And the issue there was some of these teachers barely knew these students. They had one meeting to talk to their reference writer and a reference to tell them who they were and what they were about. Based on that one meeting, the reference writer had to write, a short reference for them. So if you just think about it, right, you have one reference writer who knows, who knows about this student thoroughly. From the age of 12 to 17, they've worked closely with the student. And a reference writer who's just met their student one time, right, before they had to write this reference. Who's going to write a better reference? Probably the first teacher, right? And so that's very important for you to, find teachers that actually like you, who actually will be willing to write a very good reference for you. So I can't stress this enough. Yeah, find a good reference writer. And finally, after all of this, the most important part of your application is your Common App essay. Right? So what is your Common App essay? Typically, every year, the Common App releases 4 to 5 prompts, essay titles that you have to write an essay for. And the idea of these essays is to let the university know about you and your life, basically. And in your Common App essay, you want to show 3 things. Firstly, who you were before. Secondly, how you have grown to who you are today. And thirdly, who you will be in the future. Now let that sink in for a little while. Like, why should you be telling this story, right? From the perspective of an admissions officer, before they read your essay, you're simply a mixture of, extracurricular activities, random information about your background, your grades, and a variety of subjects, right? But what ties them together, right? Who are you really? Your Common App essay ties these 3 elements together, right? So what you're supposed to tell in your Common App essay is a consistent narrative, right? Who are you? Like, what made you who you are? That you decided to take these extracurricular activities, that you decided to take these classes, right? How did these pieces of your story fit in together, right? So for me personally, what I wrote about was how I got to become a student leader, and how I became who I am today. And the way I told that story was I talked about who I was as a person first entering middle school. When I first entered middle school, I was going through early puberty. I didn't feel very confident with myself. I was starting to be more self-aware of like who I was in the greater school context. And so I was a bit shy, around school. I didn't know what clubs I should belong in. I didn't know if I belonged. But I felt that there were a group of people who were student leaders at my school. These student leaders were responsible for working with younger students. So they would actually, encourage us to join school events, participate in like competitions on school campus. And these people, were very encouraging. They were very nice. They would come talk to us during break times and forum periods about our problems, about our day. And because of this consistent encouragement, I felt like I was able to gain more confidence in a school environment, and it made me feel like I belonged to the school itself. And so as a result of that, I became more confident, I became more engaged, and I became more willing to engage in a variety of activities on school campus. So when it was my turn, when I became, one of the older students at school, I wanted to give back to the people around me, right? So I talked about how I became a student leader. I worked very closely with my younger students. I would bring them, Christmas cards, candy during like holidays. I would encourage them to participate in events. I would like go down during forum period just to hang out with them and make them feel like more confident. And I talked about how rewarding that experience was for me to give back in a way that and help in the way that I was helped when I was younger, right? And I also talked about how I wanted to bring that sort of mindset to every single environment that I was in, whether it be like debating or MUN. Like, I wanted to be the guy who could help the people who, probably weren't as confident, or probably who weren't as, who probably weren't as confident, or who were as shy, or like who weren't as capable initially, right? I wanted to be the person who gave people confidence and who helped people who weren't as able as they were to also succeed together, right? And that was the message I sort of wanted to convey in my essay. And what that implicitly described in my essay was that the person I'll be in the future will probably be someone who wants to help other people in society in the future. Someone who will help the people, maybe on college campus succeed as well, right? As you may know, Harvard University, or like any university, is a very stressful environment, right? So when an admissions officer sees an essay like this, they'll think, hey, this person can actually succeed at school, at my university, and they can also make the people around them better off. In fact, when they graduate, I think they can make society as a whole better off, right? So I think that is why my essay was a pretty effective essay. And this is something for you to think about as well. When you're writing your essay, you should be able to show the admissions officer who you will become by talking about the trajectory in which you've been improving on. Who you were, who you are today. If you can draw that line through those 2 points, it follows very logically that you'll be an upward trend and become better and be able to make a difference or make a contribution in your own way when you get to university or when you graduate. And when you can show that you are able to make that difference, you become a very attractive candidate to admissions officers. So that is why the Common App essay is one of the most important components of your application. It's because it's the way for you to describe in your own terms who you are and help the admissions officer make sense of whether or not you are a good fit and whether or not you're a good candidate and a good person to sort of nurture. Ideally, you want to embody some values that the school also embodies, right? Because if you do, the school will personally have a stake and actually want you to come to their school because they want you to help you succeed because you propagate the values that the school also believes in. Yes. So that is something for you to think about as you write your college essay. What is it about me, right? What is my story? And how does it fit in? And how does everything I do fit into that story, right? For me personally, I really enjoyed this writing experience because I felt that, I spent a lot of time thinking about who I was and what I stood for as I wrote my Common App essay. Like I would sometimes just go out on walks during this period, by the river where I live, and just like think, like what do I care about? Why did I do certain things that I did before? And what motivates me in the current day, right? Even if you don't get into, the university of your dreams, I think writing the Common App essay, really putting the time in to, be introspective and think about what matters to you and what your values are will be very helpful for you in life. And if you do succeed in like really identifying what you care about and what motivates you day to day, you'll probably be able to paint a very compelling picture of yourself and be very attractive to most universities in the world. So after your Common App essay, there are also college-specific essays. So generally, the rule of thumb for your college-specific essays is that through these essays, you want to show 2 things, right? Your passion for your major or your passion for the college you are applying for. Why do you want this school specifically, right? This is why research in your college-specific essays is very important, right? You want to know maybe what are some resources you want to use? What are some faculty you want to know? What is unique to this school that you can only get in this school? Because only when you know these answers can you compellingly tell the admissions officer why you have to come to this school, right? Why should you go to UC Berkeley as opposed to UCLA or UC San Diego? You need to do your research so you know the answer to this question. And when you do know the answer to this question, you can write a very compelling essay to tell them to admit you because you're very passionate for this school. For my college-specific essay, I linked my personal interests and passion to what Harvard can offer. So my essay began by talking about my high school activities, right? So I had done debating, I'd done Model United Nations for a very long time. In debating and Model United Nations, you talk about a lot of like social issues and how to solve these issues, right? You'll talk about poverty. You'll talk about, how to resolve international disputes, right? You'll talk about what are the best policies to make sure that, students can get the best education that they need, right? But at the end of the day, Model United Nations and debating are centered around talking, right? It's more about, okay, let's talk about these issues for an hour in the classroom somewhere. And like one of us wins, one of us loses. No one really cares, right? No one really cares about the specific issues. You can talk about all these solutions to these real world problems, but you won't actually be doing anything. And that sort of annoyed me. I still really liked MUN and I still really liked debating, but it struck me that I wanted to try something different. I wanted to do something that actually made a difference, which is why I went out and founded this START Foundation, right? Like so my friends and I had realized that, we are living in a very privileged sort of background compared to, the rest of Hong Kong and the rest of China, right? And we wanted to find a way to give back and do something meaningful, which is why we decided to found this charitable foundation called the START Foundation. And what we basically did was we had to reach out independently to various charitable organizations to see if any of them wanted to partner with us. Once we did that, we found a partner organization that matched us with a school. We had to do a variety of fundraisers in school. We had to decide, how best to raise money. There were a lot of internal problems that we had to deal with. We had to market our organization. And once we raised the money, we actually got to go on a trip to rural Guangdong to see the school that we got to work with. And it was a really great experience. It was really amazing, really indescribable to see, your own actions really contribute to making a difference to, someone less privileged than you, right? Seeing that your actions actually have consequences and that those consequences are actually good and making a difference within society. And that drove us to expand our organization even more. So we actually decided to pass on the organization with all the infrastructure to a group of younger students. And to the best of my knowledge, this organization still exists at Xiaoteng College, which is something I'm really proud of. So I talked about, wanting to make a real world difference and how this experience taught me and made me even hungrier to make even more, contributions towards society. And I talked about how I wanted to continue that at Harvard, learning from some of the best economists in the world, working on economic development. So I did some research and I found two professors whose work I was really interested in. And I talked about how going to Harvard would mean that I would be able to meet these professors. And I actually got to meet with one of them through one of my lectures. And I think that was a very great experience for me to sort of learn from him, hear what he has to say. I also talked about the Belfer Center, which is this organization within Harvard that focuses on economic development. I talked about how I would be very excited to use the resources that this school would provide me, this organization would provide me if I did get into Harvard. And so because I was able to show that I had these passions, and that Harvard would actually help me further these passions, it made a very compelling statement to Harvard that they should admit, right? Because through my essays, I had shown a certain degree of maturity or certain idea or certain values that Harvard really cared about. I sort of talked about this just now, right? Because Harvard itself, or any school itself, has a set of institutional values that it wants to propagate to the rest of the world, right? These are things that Harvard or any other school thinks are really important for the rest of the world. If you can show that your values actually aligns to the values of this school, this college or this institution will be very happy. In fact, they'll beg you to come to your school, right? Because you're exactly what they're looking for. You're exactly what they hope to spread to the rest of the world, right? Which is why through your two college essays, you should be able to convey, firstly, who you are about, and secondly, why you should definitely go to this school, given who you are about. If you can convey these two things, any college will be very happy to admit, because that means you're a very good fit for this school, right? You will be able to take advantage of all the resources available at this college and make a success of it. And when you make a success and you are able to make a difference within society, the school itself also gains, because they are also able to make a difference through you. So this is a very important thing to think about as you go about writing your college essays or think about writing your college essays. Of course, there's some exceptions to this rule. I know some schools like Princeton and U Chicago would also like to see how you think. So they have very creative prompts for you to write about. For U Chicago, I actually started writing the essay that I wrote for U Chicago that I didn't send out was about something about like, what is square one and what does that mean to you? So like, that's a very abstract question, of course. And I know that U Chicago in particular really likes students who are quite quirky, who have like very creative ideas. So for these essays, you should just try to be as creative as possible and try to tie in your own experiences to the essay itself. Second of all, for the UCs, instead of 2 essays, you have 4 essays. But that doesn't make much of a difference because you should be able to cover the same themes as you do in the traditional Common App model that I covered previously. Finally, there are the interviews. Excuse me. For the interviews, not all schools actually require students to do an interview. When you do an interview, it's mostly for the school to get a first-hand account of who you are from someone who has previously gone to their school. So most interviews by American schools are done by alumni, and these people would have gone to school at the university. They'll know a lot about what this university cares about, so they'll be able to see whether or not you're a good fit for the school. So how do you prepare for your interview? Firstly, be prepared to tell your story and what you're passionate about, right? So there are some questions that the interviewer will definitely ask, like, what do you care about? Or why do you want to study the subject that you want to study? Or why do you want to go to this university? So you should have the answers to these questions memorized already in your head, or have a very good idea of like what you want to tell them. Also, do your research on your interviewers, because if you can build up some sort of rapport with the interviewer, or you can show that you're very similar to the interviewer, then the interviewer also has a stake in helping you succeed. Personally, for me, I was very lucky because my interviewer, like something that I said were like my values really aligned to those with my interviewer. And so she was very helpful throughout the entire interview process. She worked very closely with me. She asked me a lot of questions about myself. When she wasn't sure what I was talking about, she would ask me to clarify. And as a result of that, because we had that sort of connection initially, she was able and really willing to write an extra good reference for me to send back to the school. And as a result of that, I think a very large part of why I got into Harvard was because my interviewer was so helpful and so willing to go the extra mile to portray to the school who I really was. So really, it's very important that you learn about your interviewer, try to build up some sort of connection with your interviewer, and be very prepared to tell the interviewer fully who you are. Because if you can give them an accurate representation of yourself, they can also convey that forward to the university, which will help your application. So finally, we're going to go into the research process. So I've talked a lot about like the entire application process. How do you actually research for a university? So firstly, you should have an idea of the schools that you want to pick, right? And the way you should do this is separate them into 3 categories: your high reach, your reach, and your safety universities, right? So high reach should be those schools that you think you align pretty well with, but you're not sure if you're going to get in because these schools are known to be very competitive, right? So personally, my high reach was Harvard, but other high reach schools may include things like Princeton or Stanford or MIT or UPenn even. Again, these are schools, but they don't necessarily have to be that. Your high reach depends on like your own academic ability. So you need to make a good assessment of yourself before you apply as well. So these are your high reach schools. There should be 1 or 2 schools that you're really going out there and just throwing everything at, because this is a school, this is your dream school, and there's no place you'd rather be but this school. Then there are your reach universities. These universities should be moderately challenging, but if you do well, these should be the schools that these are the schools that you have to try moderately hard to get into, but shouldn't be too hard. Like your confidence level to getting into them should be about like 60 or 70%. So for me, my reach universities were, well, it was going to be UC Berkeley and maybe U Chicago, because I felt like my academic ability was probably on par with the rest of these schools. And finally, safety schools, safety university. So this is the university that you think you're probably guaranteed to get it. So these typically are like things like state schools. For me personally, it was the University of Toronto. Sorry. Oops. For me personally, it was the University of Toronto. Because if I didn't get into American university, I would rather have gone to a Canadian school because I have Canadian citizenship. But your safety school doesn't have to be. Your safety school just has to be some school that you have nearly a 99% chance of getting into. So based on your scores, you should be able to locate such a school that you'll be still happy to go to, and you're very confident that you're probably going to get into. Because the worst case scenario is you apply to like 6 high-reach schools and you don't get into a single one, and you don't end up not going to university at all. And that's like very bad. So what factors need to be considered when you're applying and you're doing your research? Well, there are 5 key areas, I think. Firstly is the area of academic rigor. Because if you are not on par with the educational standards of the school, you're going to struggle, right? Even if you did get in, but then your academic level isn't as high as it should be, you're going to run into some issues at the school. So it's very important that you pick a school that goes at the right pace and the right difficulty that you're very used to. Secondly, institutional culture. Different schools have very different cultures. And that might affect how much you enjoy the experience of going to that school. I know schools like UC Berkeley tend to be very intense because it's very competitive there. Schools like Harvard are more laid back, but there's still a very strong sense of pre-professional drive. So people here care about getting jobs a lot. For liberal arts schools, maybe Swarthmore, maybe it might be more laid back. It's more chill. It's more focused on furthering your intellect rather than going out and trying to find a job. So it's very important that the culture of the schools that you're applying to fits into your personal identity. Thirdly is location. This is something that I sort of overlooked when I applied, but location really matters because it really affects firstly your out of school life, your social life, for example, and also the weather. Weather plays a very big impact, at least for me personally, on my mood. So sometimes you need to make sure that the environment that you're going to be in is one that you want to study in, right? Because some areas might just not work for you. I personally really hated places that are always gloomy all the time, which is why I didn't really apply to the UK schools, because I didn't really like the weather over there. So that's something for you to think about. Fourthly is extracurricular environment. Other activities on campus that you would want to join. Are these activities things that you care about? Will you have a place to go when you arrive on campus? These are things that you should think about because your extracurricular life and your environment is very important for your psychological well-being as well. And lastly, tuition fees and financial aid. So school in America is very expensive. So depending on your financial situation, this might be more of an issue for you. You might be more interested in looking for schools that offer a lot of scholarships or financial aid. Harvard is a need-blind school in terms of financial aid, meaning that it doesn't care whether or not you can pay for your tuition. If they want you, they are willing to provide all of your tuition for you to come to Harvard. So I think that was a very attractive thing about this school. that I learned about that drove me to apply really early to Harvard. So lastly, we'll talk about how do I research about these schools. Personally, again, for me, applying to universities back in senior year, I wasn't really sure what I should research. So let's talk about what I should research first. So these questions that you might ask yourself in this research process include things like, what are the programs like? Is it quarters, semesters, or trimesters? How big are class sizes? Are classes taught by professors? So, these differ from school to school, and it's very important that, what is done at the school matches what you need. I know, for example, Harvard is a semester system, UChicago on the left, and UCLA are taught in quarters. So this means like different lengths of vacations. This also affects how much schoolwork is loaded into each term. Also, I know for Harvard and UChicago, the classes tend to be quite small. So you get a lot of interaction with your professors, whereas UCLA, being a state school, have classes that are quite big. So, these are factors that you should really consider thinking about academically. Secondly, who are the faculty? What are their achievements? How does their work interest you? How is their work relevant to you? Knowing this information is very important in writing your your college-specific essay, as I mentioned before. And it also, affects which school you might want to go to. Because I think, personally, I would much rather study from professors whose work I'm really interested in, or who have experiences that I really want to learn from. For example, one of the professors I talked about previously was once the head of the World Bank and the Secretary of the Treasury in America. And, I just thought those experiences were very interesting. And that is one of the reasons why I wanted to come to like a school like Harvard. My previous professors at this school have included people like an ex-vice president of Russia, someone who was the head of the National Economic Advisory Council for the President of the United States, and also the head of the Boston Federal Reserve. So these people are a variety of people who, have many interesting experiences. And this is one of the main reasons why I wanted to apply to Harvard, because I knew these faculty had these interesting experiences. That being said, you can find these interesting people at all sorts of institutions. It's just very important that you know who these people are, so you can talk about them, and you'll have a good idea of whether or not you want to study from these people when you do apply. Thirdly, we can go on university websites to see what extracurricular programs are available on campus. Are there any clubs or any organizations that are very unique to this campus, right? There are some schools with more of a focus on like innovation and startups, like MIT, or there might be some schools that have more like artsy organizations, right? Like Harvard has like 12 a cappella groups that you can apply to. So that's very important for you to think about as you're doing your research. And finally, what is the culture like, right? What were the scores and backgrounds of previous people who got in? Are there alumni I can contact? Because this is very important in the sense that it gives you an understanding of the culture of the school you're going to. This is very important because you want to know that the other people who go to this school are people who are like you. Because if people aren't like you there, then you're probably not going to have a very fun time studying there. So these are things that you should think about. So what are some ways in which you can research? Firstly, college search websites. I know personally QS Guide is very good at this. It's a website, you can Google it. It gives you rankings of schools on every major. So you can get a good idea of like what are good schools for the major you're interested in. And it also gives you a way to ballpark. So I think, I'm not completely sure if that's the case. It'll typically give you some statistics about scores that previous students had. So you can sort of ballpark to see, if you're in the range of students who might get into that school. Secondly, official university websites. These are always very good about learning about course formats, learning about faculty, learn about traditions and available programs on campus. So this is very important for you. I think YouTube videos are actually very good. There are many day in the life videos that students at universities film. So they'll film like what goes on in their day, like what their day looks like, when they get up, when they go to like where they go to classes, what the dining hall's like, what the food's like. So this will just give you a very intimate sort of exposure to what going to school there is actually like. And finally, you should go to university fairs and alumni events to sort of meet the alumni. This is very important because if you do get to meet the alumni, you'll get a sort of first-hand account of what studying at that school is really like. They'll be able to tell you, what are the interesting clubs that you should join on campus, or what are some classes that you should take or you shouldn't take, or what is living in a city like Cambridge or a city like Chicago like, right? So university fairs and alumni events are also one of the most important ways in which you should research your universities. And that sort of rounds off my spiel. So if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them right now. And if you'd like to get into contact with me, I think you should just contact Alex and the MAST organization, and I'll be very happy to talk to you personally if that's what you're interested in. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Cedric. Just don't go yet. We still have a Q&A in a bit. Again, to make this most worthwhile for the people who are attending this event is to ask any questions. And all our questions, if you see at the very bottom, there's a Q&A button, is all private, so people can't read it. But we'll read it aloud to Cedric in this webinar. But again, to briefly recap what we're doing at MAST Education, we are a online tutoring platform where we try to find tutors like Cedric, who have gone through the IB systems themselves. We can help with academic tutoring, but also mentoring more so. Definitely, Cedric, if I was a kid, if I could dial back time, I would love to have you as a mentor to guide me. I think it would definitely help me make better choices in terms of, college applications, how to go about developing my passions and leadership and extracurriculars and whatnot. So as of now, our platform has around 260 plus tutors. We have 200 plus tutor mentors who are similar to Cedric's background. By next May 2019, we plan to have 2,000 plus tutor mentors. So we're constantly trying to find great talent like Cedric to help students, because we understand there's no blueprint. There's no one way of helping students. Everyone's individual. And that's why we try to find alumni who have graduated from that school to help the students achieve their academic success and also go through their application process. Could you scroll to the next page, Cedric?
Yep.
Yeah. Again, I think Cedric mentioned something earlier about having attending alumni events, trying to get to know other schools and whatnot. We are hosting a series of these webinars. We've recently hosted one about the UK admission process. If anyone's interested, they can reach out to any one of the MAST team members and we can send you that video link. We're also going to do one for Canada, different IBs, different schools. So we'll be hosting these quite a bit in the near future. And in August, just a couple of months ago, we had over 30 plus of our tutor mentors come and meet with over 100 of our students and parents to talk about their university. So I think it would be a very useful thing for parents in the future. We plan to have our next one in December of this year when our tutor mentors are back. And we're also going to be having this virtual alumni tutoring center. Alumni tutoring has actually been around since ancient Greece, where I forget which academy, but I think it's the Athenian Academy, basically utilized alumni tutors or peer tutors to help their students improve. And it shows that there is a substantial increase in terms of self-interest, in terms of intrinsic motivation, in terms of understanding the knowledge. We're hosting our virtual alumni tutoring center as a way to give back to the people who have supported us on next November 4th from 8 to 9 p.m. where we'll have two tutors, one for biology and one for physics, where students can come online and ask questions that they might need help with. Now, this is more focused for HKS. We're going to have other virtual alumni tutoring centers for CIS, Charlton College and whatnot. But we obviously need to see that there will be people who attend. Otherwise, our tutors' times will be wasted. So if there is any interest, do feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to set up these virtual alumni tutoring centers for students to come and ask questions to get help on their academics. Again, so I guess the next thing is that we are opening up the floor for any questions that you might have for Cedric. I guess we'll open up for 5 minutes, and if we don't see anything, I guess we can call it a day, Cedric.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Hey, Cedric, perhaps you can talk a little bit about if you're a student nowadays, how would you go about finding a mentor? And how would you utilize this mentor to help you best?
I think it's very important. That's an interesting question. I think looking firstly in your primary network, so like who your parents might know, or like alumni at your school, to see if there's anyone who aligns with you in terms of like interests or what you want to do. So let's say you want to be a physics major, you might maybe one of your parents' friends is a physics professor. You would go talk to them, or you would maybe look in your alumni list to see if there's any people who are studying physics. I think that would be a very good way for you to get started, looking for people to talk to. When you do find someone to talk to, well, you can ask a variety of questions, right? So like, what is studying physics really like? Ask them about themselves. Be genuinely curious, right? So like, what are they researching right now, right? What are some fields of study in physics they think are most interesting right now, or like are the most pertinent issues? These are all questions that you should be able to ask, or if you're really passionate about a certain subject, you should be interested about. And through this, you can not only develop a relationship with a person who might help you in the future, but you can also learn something for yourself. Yeah.
That's a great answer. So we do have one question is, and of course, if you don't feel comfortable about answering this, you don't have to, but did you use a college counselor yourself?
Yeah, so I did hire a person to work with me in the essay writing process. So what we did together was basically every week we would have a weekly Skype call, and I would tell them about my a certain set of ideas that I would have for my college essay, and we would discuss because like in the early stages I had a whole variety of ideas that I wanted to write about, and so this guy was more experienced, so he was able to tell me which ideas I should develop more and which ideas were not as expressive in terms of like showing who I was. And so through this gradual process of like discussing my ideas with someone, I was able to decide on the sort of essay I wanted to write. And also he was just very helpful in terms of like describing the entire process, what sort of things I should think about in terms of describing my activities to make my application look most attractive. Okay. Also, how long the essay should be. Generally, the Common App essay is 650 words. For the supplementary essay as well, as a rule of thumb, it should be one side of A4, like no more than one side of A4, basically. So that's also about 650 words. The reason for this is if it's too long, these admissions officers are looking at 10,000 applications over a month, maybe. If it's too long, they might just miss all of the details. So it's much more advantageous for you to be succinct and very to the point about what you're about. So I think generally like 650 to 700 words is the ideal range. How can you fit all of what you need to explain? It's just a process of like picking and choosing, right? So initially my essays were like 900 to 1,000 words long. So, you know, during those discussions and like in my own time, we would like talk, I would like think about, you know, what sort of areas are not completely necessary, what I can take out, how I can express certain ideas more succinctly. And so like gradually you'll be able to cut your essay down and down to about that range. I mean, it's possible. You just have to have a very focused essay that covers like 1 or 2 main points about you, as opposed to like covering every single thing about you. And like the important thing is like you should be able to whittle down like your main values, what you care about, to a few, you know, general sort of first principles or first values. So once you get into the process, it should be pretty easy. Of course, like I don't know if that's a good answer. So maybe if you have like a more specific case, I could set up a personal meeting with you to talk about how to cut the words down if that's a problem you have right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think your advice, and especially those few pages that you showed on the essay itself, was very helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to work with a student who needed help with their personal statements, I mean, how would you go about this?
It'd just be like a conversation at first, right? Like I would need to know about student himself or herself. Like she would just tell me, okay, like I just ask her, oh, what do you do at school, right? Like what are the things that motivate you and drive you, right? What do you really love about your day-to-day life, right? What makes you happy, right? These are like certain questions that I would start with, and hopefully through like talking about these questions, the student can also think with me and tell me, you know, experiences or like, you know, various anecdotes that do matter to them, right? And like through this like gradual conversation and exploration of these various experiences, you know, we would be able to like come to a more accurate understanding of like what really matters to this person. Or maybe like I would be able to pinpoint or locate, if the student can, like what seems to matter to this person the most. And I can direct the student in that direction and, you know, give them ideas on how they can present themselves in the most attractive light.
No, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to throw you a quick curveball here, but I mean,
right.
How do you think you would be a better IB tutor than, you know, what's offered out there?
I have fewer students, so yeah, most of those guys have like 40, 50 students. It's hard for them to like, you know, develop a very good relationship with their students. I try to get to know my students first before, you know, trying to teach, because I think I want to be friends with like, you know, who I'm teaching, right? I feel like it's better for both of us if, you know, we both like each other and like we both want to be there at that time. The worst case is when like the student's not really into it and I'm like, oh, I have to go tutor this kid again. I think it's better if, you know, like if I tutor you, I'll definitely try to like be friends with you and try to make that process a lot more fun. I think that's a lot more fun and a lot more personalized, I think that's the main advantage.
And how about going through the IB courses yourself?
Sorry?
How about going through the IB courses yourself? I mean,
going through my IB courses?
No, like having gone through them yourselves, does it arm you with a different set of knowledge that can make you more potent as a tutor?
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, I'll know like certain tips and tricks, how to practice, you know, what sort of questions do turn up, what sort of questions don't turn up. You know, just a very like good understanding of like the curriculum in general and how you should study for it, how you should prepare.
Right.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of this stuff is sort of like skipped over by many schools who are more focused on teaching the curriculum. Like test taking skills are very important. I don't know, some international schools just don't teach extremely well, especially with larger classes. And so some students might, have some material that they're not very comfortable with and need extra clarification. And as someone who has gone through the entire process and who had to like, go through it slowly and like learn it in a very intuitive way myself, I think it's very easy for me to sort of like convey that information onwards to someone who's learning it again.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I don't see any more questions here. I think we can wrap it up. But again,
Okay.
if any parents do have any further questions for Cedric, feel free to reach out anyone at MAST. We try to find a good tutor mentor for your child, because we really believe that a tutor mentor is the answer to the current stresses that a lot of students are going through. Again, thank you very much for your time to attend our webinar, and thank you, Cedric, for your time as well. It was very informative.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah. All right. Everyone have a good night, and we look forward to seeing you more at our webinars. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.